Every fan loves when their team wins the offseason. Big money contracts bring smiling faces come spring training. But how many of these contracts actually pay off? Today, we begin the journey to evaluate the 5 biggest contracts each year from 2000 to 2019. The best and worst each year will be pitted against each other until we've determined the dollar-for-dollar best contract of the last 2 decades and the worst. Hopefully, by the end, we can determine if winning the offseason brings a promise of prosperity in October or a curse of caustic leadership. Our first stop on this adventure is the year 2000. Let's meet the men who signed the biggest free agent deals that offseason. Our first contestant, having moved on from Cincinnati to the Tampa Bay Devil Rays, is Greg Vaughn. Posting a 5.4 WAR over the 3 seasons of his contract, Vaughn was paid over $24 million, giving the Rays a price of $4.46 million per win, or just over $6.6 million in 2019 numbers. Next up, we have Chuck Finley. After 13 successful seasons with the Halos, he signed with Cleveland on a 3-year, $27 million deal. He only played 2.5 of the 3 years of his contract, being moved on to St. Louis at the deadline of 2002. Finley's 6.3 WAR over the 2.5 years cost Cleveland $2.85 million per win, or $4.2 million in 2019 numbers. The third contract for our contenders goes to Texas and their signing of Kenny Rogers, leaving the Mets for $22.5 million over 3 years. Rogers played out his entire contract, accruing 10 WAR for the Rangers, giving them a value of $2.25 million per win, or $3.3 million in 2019 numbers. For our next contract, we move out west to Seattle as they sign John Olerud to a 3-year, $20 million deal. For their investment, the Mariners got 14 WAR over the full 3 seasons. His value per WAR was an impressive $1.4 million, or $2.1 million in 2019 numbers. Our final spot for 2000 belongs to Darren Oliver, who signed on to be teammates with Kenny Rogers in Texas. His 3-year, $19 million contract, of which he spent 2 years with the Rangers, produced a negative .4 WAR. That means the Rangers ate $12.6 million on the contract, or the equivalent of $18.7 million in 2019 numbers. Now that we've met the players, let's rank them and find out who will be moving on. 5th place obviously goes to Oliver, with a negative WAR that was no way to keep him from entering the losers bracket. 4th place goes to Greg Vaughn. At the adjusted 2019 numbers, $7 million a win is just not good enough. It was a tight race for 2nd place as the 2 starters dueled it out, with Finley posting a fine adjusted $4.3 million a win and Rogers sporting a $3.9 million price tag. Both hurlers came in below our expected dollars per win for starters. We'll have to give the edge to Rogers in this case, as his ratio was just a bit better. But there was no stopping Olerud from moving on. With an adjusted $2.1 million per win, he was not only a value for the Mariners, he was an absolute steal, and should be an early favorite for best big money signing of the millennium. With our first entries in the winners group being Olerud, and our first loser being Oliver, we'll have to see how things pan out going forward for Finley and Rogers. Perhaps a wildcard spot could see them re-emerge, as the next round will take into account other aspects of the player's tenure besides dollars per win. But before we get ahead of ourselves, we need to move into the 2000 offseason. With big names and bigger money, the competition is just getting started.